forced to have these things. It's almost like it's almost like you're bribed into doing it. You know, that you're entrapped, and you can't play sports unless you do this. You know.
Everybody heard the question. The question, Andy, if I'm incorrect, tell me. He's asking, can you equate drug testing and the resulting eligibility with the same as passing grades and eligibility? Would that be a fair paraphrase of that?
There are a couple situations. California is unique. That's the only state in the union today where they have banned drug testing, and that is not because of a federal constitution issue, but because of the way that the California state constitution is written with regard to privacy. So that's a state issue. So it's illegal to test for drugs in California, but if you're at Berkeley or Stanford or UCLA, you can't participate in NCAA things unless you are drug tested. So the universities can't do it, but by consent, then the other agencies can. Other than that, the courts have reasonably consistently held that it is indeed a privilege, and that that's no more of a penalty than poor grades or anything else. They've equated it right in there with a violation of university rules or team rules or whatever.
I like to point out that there's an obvious difference in terms of what triggers the privilege. Good grades or remaining eligible under a grading process does not require a Fourth Amendment constitutional issue. Drug testing is a little more severe, obviously, in its application to the individual. John does portray that fairly well, though. But I would caution you again, and this is an area that we've talked about quite frankly, I believe to a great extent schools rely on the concept, well, we do get consent. And I would say before I'm willing to equate that eligibility can be based on such a privilege, you have a right to really look at what you have consented to and not to an anomaly presented like I showed in the two issues that I presented. If the consent is there, I would agree with John. But then you have reasonable circumstances that can condition participation.
We both agree that if the consent form is done well, and that the policies and procedures of the institution must comply with the consent. It's sort of ludicrous to say failure to comply is guilt. We've said a long time ago, but that it'd be much more reasonable to say if you don't comply with this, you don't participate. But to say that that's viewed as a positive test is sort of stupid.
I'd like to ask you to kind of look into the future, maybe 10 or 15 years, and give us your best guess on this. A court in Montana recently threw out a drug test on the basis that the state actor, the university, really didn't have a probable cause or the right to search and seize the urine and test, partially based upon the argument, look, this is only sports and games, as the judge said. This is not a big deal. This is not airline pilots, train engineers, transportation, public safety. This is, some university students getting together and playing some games. In other words, there's really, not a justifiable need there. And you raise a good issue, John, about the problem probably is greater among perhaps non-athletes or in workforce or whatever. So what do you suppose we'll be looking at 10 or 15 years from now in terms of, say, a university saying, well, we're not just concerned about the health and well-being of our athletes, but of all our students and faculty. I mean, after all, we want faculty who are, focused on their jobs, and if they're using drugs, that presumably that's going to have some effect in terms of the way they do their job, or maybe not even being able to come to work. Do you think we're looking down the road to other non-athlete groups at a state university being drug tested with those arguments, or just pursue that a bit?
You may recall the brief précis I gave on what we call the closely regulated industry, and my point at that point was it's very difficult for me to put any form of athletics in the area of a closely regulated industry, meaning that if you play athletics, you should have a diminished right to privacy. I can't really take that seriously, okay? I think the problem you face in sport is that sport tends to take itself too seriously. I'm not here coming out of the Department of Sport Management and Communications saying that we don't want sport. We take ourselves very seriously. And the reason that John had posed to you at the end of his discussion, that frankly we can cite to you studies that show drug use among athletes is less than the general population. Why do we care about the weight targets? Ramsey Clark asked this last night, what do we care about? Why do we care about the athletics? And why do we use that to pose that? Is that a closely regulated industry we've got to worry about? And if the statistics say that drug use isn't prevalent in that group as opposed to the other group, your question becomes very much more important. In the workplace, if I am a private employee, I essentially have no right. There is a common law right to privacy. But I can think of two instances where if an employee was found was tested and found positive in the drug test, and let's say the right of privacy was violated, the employer could fire him anyway because the employee is an at-will employee. That reminded me last night when we were discussing, when Ramsey Clark was discussing measuring this, the person and the private employee has a much greater impact on what we need to address in this in the next 15 years than does Roy Tarpley. Under public employees, we have the same scenario. In fact, if our general student population has instances of higher drug use than our athletes, then the next 10 or 15 years, and now in short, some to answer your question, needs a complete redirection on how we look and where we are going to focus drug testing. Why won't we do it? I think just for the reasons John said. It's expensive to do it correctly. In athletics, we do it with fairly unreliable tests that are inexpensive. Can you imagine what it's going to cost if we say we need to focus on the general population and we need to do it right? I'm not very hopeful in the next 10 to 15 years that we're going to focus where we should.
I think athletics sort of brought it on themselves through big business. I think that's the key, is to become big business. Regardless of what you think about him, sometimes Bobby Knight I think is right. For example, he said he felt that the thing is overblown, that what we should do is have all the college basketball games begin at 7 o'clock in the evening so they're done at a reasonable hour. The kids can go to bed, get calmed down, go to bed. That on the weekends that they should not play after 7 o'clock at night. But think of the TV. We have games, I can watch games at home from beginning at 7:30 on Monday night, and then 9:30, and then midnight, and I suppose there's something after midnight if I really wanted to watch it. That's really exploitation of the athletes. But why are they exploited? They're exploited because of money. The athletic departments are doing money. And that's what's brought the testing. It's a commerce. It's just like anything else. And we really don't even have a unified thing with commercial athletics, because some of them are antitrust regulated, some of them don't fall under the trust. We've got differences between the way that baseball and football and basketball are all handled. There's not even a commonality amongst the handling of professional sports.
You know what occurs to me, if I can ask one, John and I kind of think, I got to be frank with you, we kind of think that drug issues are becoming passé when we look at HIV and genetic testing and the things that are coming down the road. I don't pat me and shoot holes in the presentation and say, hey, this is really a worthless topic, you should be on this one. Because the testing and the constitutional safeguards are important in themselves. But when you talk about the employer, Gary, and where we would go 15 years, or when we talk about the student, let's talk about alcohol. And have we really reacted in the workplace to alcohol? I think there is some move in the workplace. Rather than firing and excluding, we are becoming a little more enlightened, saying maybe we should provide rehabilitation. I would tell you that if the employer, the private employer, non-public, non-state employer, provides an unannounced random drug test, and you test positive, but the result is you will be put in rehabilitation or counseling, my guess is you don't have a constitutional challenge there. Even though it's unannounced, because you're not being suspended, you're not being terminated, they have a right to do that. We tend to frame testing for drug in terms of suspension and termination. That's where the constitutional challenges come. Do you see in the next 10 or 15 years us become more enlightened in how we're going to deal with alcohol in the workplace and in the employment place? And if we can say, yes, we do, then there is hope in the next 10 or 15 years for the other areas of testing. I would pose if we don't become more enlightened in that area, then no. Next 10 or 15 years, we'll see no change.
Some institutions report that maybe as high as 80% of students have some kind of alcohol abuse problems, whether it's binge drinking on the weekend or whatever as a post-alcoholic, okay? If we look at the dollars that costs in terms of accidents, missed work, and so forth, we're talking about things that are far more expensive than dealing with the drug testing here. The constitutional issues kick in when you lose something, as Pat said. If you put people into a rehabilitation program, if you keep it confidential and don't spread it to the world, I don't think that any court is going to say that you even have a testing issue.
Yeah, what I was trying to get at, of course, was
I
saying,
mean, after 20 minutes, we haven't gotten what you were after.
I was speculating, where a university might say, well, with tremendously increased healthcare costs and insurance programs and everything, why don't we simply drug test all faculty and all sorts not hire faculty who smoke. Remember on 2020, a couple of weeks ago, the private employer who fired one of his employees for smoking at a restaurant at noon hour and was legitimately able to do that. I'm just trying to put that over to the public sector. Now we clearly are talking about a state actor, university, and all under the guise, I suppose, of insurance costs and all of that.
That's what I was trying to go up with the genetics. There are numbers of people around that have been let loose from jobs because either they or their spouse or their kids have had high medical costs. And to bring the cost down where the institution or the employer could afford to pay for them, they've simply fired them as at will. And what if you have this information before you're even employed via genetic testing? The potential there for abuse and impact, I think, is really something we need to be aware of now. They come up with new types of tests every day on identification of genetic or other problems.
The problem I have with it is you're buying constitutional right. Because I don't want to pay a higher insurance premium, I'm going to mandate testing of whatever form, genetic, HIV, or the other. And let me, I hate to go back to Mr. Clark's speech again, but what did he pose that the problem that we face is that we are a plutocracy based on issues of wealth. And that would be, I need to save insurance premium, or we need to cut down healthcare costs, so we're going to mandate testing. I have a real problem with that. I have a real problem that we would, and I would look at it in just that regard here, that if we mandate that we have sold, right to privacy costs this much in healthcare costs. I'm not prepared to make that trade.
We're already doing that in a sense because if you have pre-existing condition, they don't cover it, right? If you have mental illness, most policies will limit you to 45 days and then you're out. So they're looking at the big costs. Now, what's going to happen with AIDS? That's a real expensive one.
Is NCAA interested in testing just for drugs that help athletes and better athletes become physically stronger? Or are they looking for other for recreational drug use? What are they after?
They have a series of categories, and let me just give you a flavor here. One of them is psychomotor and central nervous system stimulants, including such things as caffeine, depending on the level of caffeine.
Yankee wants to put this caffeine loaded drink down,
Anabolic steroids, as you might suspicion. Diuretics, weight loss for wrestlers, as an example. Sympathomimetic anamines, which are calm you down kinds of things. Substances related to specific sports, for example, if you're into riflery or something like that, you take alcohol or things to slow down the heartbeat so you can squeeze it off in between. And then you have your street drugs such as heroin, marijuana, crack, what have you. So they've got essentially 6 different categories that they test in. If you want to look at the NCAA manual, they've got a list of the specific substances. But this is small. You ought to see the IOC one. I mean, we're talking about pages. And they list it by drugs. Street names, pharmaceutical names.
Oh, that's about it. Next page, guys.